Morning, everyone. While you're logging in, I opened the webinar a little early here just so we can let people get logged in. We have over 140 registered, so give us a couple minutes while people log in before we kick off here. Kaan, oh, you're silenced there, but how long do you expect to be out of the country, or when are you due back?
I'm back Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah, tomorrow morning I'm leaving for Bordeaux. I have some business there that I'm gonna come back here, then go back to San Francisco.
Long flight in store. Are you gonna fly
Yeah,
overnight?
I don't even get jet lag anymore.
Got your strategies.
Got my strategies.
Yeah. Give people a few minutes here. Good morning again to people logging in. Your audio should be working. We're just giving people a moment here to log in. Con, I will monitor Q&A. If something comes up that's like super critical to ask in stream, I'll try to interject a little bit without cutting you off too much. But otherwise, you prefer if I hold questions to the end of your part, or you like to have it more of a kind of a dialogue presentation, or?
Whatever you want. I'm fine with it. Yeah, one thing I didn't touch on here is like how to mothball organic vineyards, because I assume those still have somewhat of a contract or attractive to people.
It could be an advantage in this market. So, I mean,
Yeah.
are you, I guess we can ask questions about that, but I think it would just kind of be like a sulfur dusting program type of thing for,
Yeah, I mean, for us, that's the best cost saving measure. So,
yeah.
because in the end, you're not protecting the you don't care about protecting the fruit.
Just trying to
Anyways,
keep
we'll talk
your,
about it.
okay, yeah. I'll kick this off. I'll give it one more minute, then we'll kick this off. All right, it's 11 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. People will still continue to log in here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today for this vital and crucial discussion on mothballing vineyards in a tough market. Before we dive into our meeting, I have a few quick housekeeping items to address. I'm Jason Sealing, President of Sonoma County Vineyard Technical Group. First, it's my pleasure to introduce your 2025 Board of Directors. We want to thank returning directors, Dr. Marilark Paget Johnson, Sandy Valera, Eric Pooler, Joan Patrick, Jerry Mackling, John Gorman, Dave Coball. We're going to welcome to the board also Mauro Maldonado. Thank you also to our ex officio director, Misty Eland, representing the Department of Weights and Measures, who is instrumental in getting and securing our continuing education units. Thank you for what you do, Misty, all you do. I'd also like to take this moment to introduce the 2025 officers of the board. Returning as secretary is Rebecca Mullaney, returning as treasurer, Jenna Russell. And welcome to the board. And we have a new vice president this year, John McKenna. And again, I'm president again for another year here. My name is Jason Sailing. We'd also like to extend our gratitude to outgoing directors Steve Ponzo, Laura Breyer, and Jeff Bacchus for their dedication and service. Your contributions will be dearly missed. Everyone, please remember that our memberships are annual. If you have not yet renewed, you can do so on our website at sonomavintech.org. Our membership fee has remained $50 for something like 30 plus years. Those dollars are worth at least twice as much now as then, so we are incredibly proud of that. I would say actually maybe they're worth half as much now, but we're incredibly proud of that and the return on investment we can offer. As an all-volunteer board, all proceeds are reinvested in education and research for the benefit of Sonoma County's wine growers and students. We're currently finalizing the finer details for the lunch at this year's Sonoma County Grape Day on February 11th. All speakers are confirmed and the agenda has been posted. If you haven't registered yet, do so, as we sold out early last year. This year's event features a slightly later start time and includes lunch, in addition to morning coffee and danishes. Misty has applied for 2.5 hours of other continuing education units and a half hour of laws and regs for a total of 3 hours. Tickets are available now and are $55 per individual. You can find a link to register at our website, sonomavintech.org, in the calendar section of the meetings page, and that's posted on February 11th. Our February member meeting will be later in the month. After Grape Day, we'll host a Keith Escalon to present the results of his ongoing fungicide trials. We'll confirm the details of that meeting later this week. At this moment, though, before we continue, I'd like to pause and honor a remarkable person we've recently lost. Dr. Anita Oberholster was not only a pivotal figure in our industry, but a cherished friend to many of us here. So we remember her incredible contributions and spirit. Please join me in a moment of silence to celebrate her memory and extend our thoughts to her family during this difficult time. Okay, thank you. We'll first hear from Dr. Kaan Kurtural today with his advice for a model for minimizing vineyard activities, also known as mothballing vineyards. And then we'll hear from Andy Casares and Misty Eland of Sonoma County on advice on things to remember and take into consideration if you're opting to go this direction. We have a robust audience today, so for questions, please use the Q&A form in Zoom, and I'll help facilitate questions during and after the program. So without further ado, Dr. Kaan Kurtural is a Senior Agronomy Technical Information Manager at Wilbur Ellis Company with a PhD in plant biology from Southern Illinois University. Dr. Kurtural began his career as an extension specialist at the University of Kentucky. His dedication to advancing agricultural science led him to California, where he's held positions as assistant professor at CSU Fresno and as associate professor at UC Davis. Dr. Kurtural has taught numerous courses and spearheaded groundbreaking research in specialty crops, plant physiology, and soil science. Please welcome Kaan Kurtural. Kaan, thank you so much. Turn it
Thank you,
over to
Jason.
you here.
Yeah, we did this work a couple of years back when no one asked for it. Well, some people had asked for it from Lodi area, but anyways, they didn't end up using it back in the early 2010s when we were still like, we're able to sell our fruit. So mothballing vineyards or parking vineyards, resting vineyards, whatever you want to call it, in the end, it's a business decision. You want to make sure that the business continues from year to year, but there are some considerations when parking or mothballing these vineyards. Where we spend most of our money is in cultural practices, namely pruning and harvest. So there are some savings you can have when you're parking these vineyards, especially when it comes to pruning, mineral nutrition and irrigation, what I call phytosanitary concerns. Then of course, harvesting concerns. So if there's no contract, you don't have to pick the fruit, but do you still have to pick that fruit and drop it to the ground? So these are some of the trials we had done previously, and I'll go through them one by one. So the goal in parking these vineyards is to make sure that I have some additional time to diversify. If the market is going to correct itself, or if you can, pick up a small contract towards the end of the season. We have an oversupply of grapes at the moment due to cheaper imports coming in and some changing consumer preferences. But the overall goal in parking these vineyards is to significantly reduce management costs so that the vineyard continues. Because keep in mind, removing a vineyard is permanent and it has a significant cost, even though TAP can provide some funds to help you remove the vineyard. So in cultural practices, when you're looking at the vineyard as a production unit, is the aim is to reduce growth and reduce cropping level. In order to reduce growth, you have to make a smaller canopy, smaller leaf area. So the first thing that comes into people's minds, like, well, can I skip dormant pruning? The answer is absolutely no. The aim is to reduce cropping level as well as cropping leaf area. If you let the vineyard grow, what we call free growth, you're going to create this giant procumbent canopy that is going to create a lot of phytosanitary concerns as well as reduce fruiting in the upcoming years. Keep in mind that the grapevine is a perennial plant. The aim with the mothballing the vineyard is not to produce a large crop, make a smaller growth, but make the canopy as healthy as possible, have the healthiest leaf area. Keep in mind that the grapevine is a perennial crop. The sources that you have are the leaves that makes the photosynthesis by reducing carbon dioxide through the use of light. These are transported via the phloem in the form of some exchangeable sugars such as non-structural carbohydrates. They will go into assimilation and storage. And if you're making a fruit that year, ideally they would go to the fruit. But since we're not making a very large canopy in a mothballed vineyard, our aim is to divert a lot of this energy to the leaves and to the perennial parts of the grapevine to make sure that the life cycle of the plant continues from year to year. So the idea that why we are making these non-structural carbohydrates is that we want to utilize them in the year that's going to come up hopefully in 2026 that we will have a marketable crop that we can profit from this vineyard. So as we're making these smaller canopies, we want to store these reserves in the grapevine perennial organs, and they are going to be important in our early season, and it's going to be crucial until bloom, so that we can still take stuff up from the vineyard soil and make the plant grow later on. Keep in mind that the fruiting shoots are born on 1-year-old dormant buds, the latent buds. Because of this character, the vineyard is pruned every year to replace the pruning wood. So the pruning will result in a removal of 80 to 90% of the dormant canes per year. So in order to make sure that this dormant bud is as healthy as possible, we want to make sure that we prune it at least something that looks like a hand-pruned vineyard, and then try to save our costs as much as possible. So the role of these canopies, as I mentioned, is to fix carbon to make as much sugar as possible. You're reducing carbon dioxide in the presence of light. The leaves are acting as a source for these sugars, and you're making a photo assimilates mainly sugars that's hopefully going to the fruit in a year when you're making a fruit, but in a mothballing year we're putting hopefully mostly into the roots as a source of zinc. So in this graph, in this work that we did, the x-axis is photosynthesis, and as you see, photosynthesis increases as the amount of leaves increase in the grapevine, and as you're increasing leaves, you can see that you can put more sugars into the sinks as indicated on the y-axis here. So this is all this graph is showing. So dormant pruning while mothballing, when we were looking at this work, we considered a lot of options. The best option we came up with was to do a very tight box, pruning into a 2 to 3 inch hedge and at most 4 inch wide, while removing all the sprawl. This makes the smallest bearing surface as you can possibly make. If you don't have a mechanical pruner or a pre-pruner, whatever you can get, you can do this also with a mechanical hedger, very easily, but you do need quite a few of them. My recommendation is not to leave them unpruned. If you leave grapevines unpruned, you have grown a 5.5 foot tall canopy on a VSP trained canopies, you are going to end up with about like 400 to 450 positions, buds. So imagine all of these bursting, you are going to end up with too much leaf area and many small clusters. And within these clusters, not too many berries set. As these canopies become procumbent, like hanging down, you are going to create the ideal conditions for phytosanitary concerns in these canopies as you leave them unpruned, making the vineyard look like it is somewhat, abandoned. As you're making these giant canopies, if you leave them unpruned, you are going to create a greater irrigation demand because your leaf area is a proxy to your irrigation demand or your water use. Of course, the in-season disease pressure also increases tremendously. When we looked at the cost of a hand pruning a mothball vineyard to a box pruned vineyard, you are looking at about 80% savings cost um, in our labor operations cost. So right now, this year, you're looking at between 165 to 175 an acre to a box prune a vineyard. So I think the decision is fairly clear. When we look at mineral nutrition irrigation for these mothballed vineyards, the thing that drives mineral nutrition in vineyards is growth. Dry biomass production of field-grown grapevines is a linear function of grapevine water use across the growing season. So as your dry biomass increases, that's the all your trunk, roots, shoots, leaves, clusters, etc. This is a curvilinear relationship with total nitrogen and total potassium use in the grapevine. So if you do not make a large enough grapevine, and if you're not going to harvest the fruit from these, you don't need to fertilize them as much. Why don't you want to fertilize them as much? So if you look at the total nitrogen per ton of fruit at 4 vineyard locations across 3 years in California, these were in Carneros, Gonzales, Oakville, and Paso Robles. 2 were white grapevines, 2 were red grapevines. These were fruiting grapevines, approximately doing about 4.5 tons of fruit to the acre. In average, you're looking at North Coast and Oakville Station, for example, you're looking roughly about 2.2 pounds of nitrogen used per ton of fruit removed. In Paso, roughly about 3 pounds. In Carneros, for Chardonnay, again around 2.5 pounds of nitrogen per ton of fruit removed. But again, this is dependent on the total growth that you are going to put on this grapevine. If you do not make a large enough canopy, you are not going to have to irrigate it as much. Therefore, you're not going to have this large nitrogen demand. So these are the literature averages. I highlighted the low end. So this is the several mineral nutrients in 1 ton of fruit from grapes, how much you would have removed. For nitrogen, about 2 pounds. Phosphorus, about 0.5 pound. Potassium is the one that's removed from the most from the vineyard. even if you don't like pick this fruit, the potassium is going to be exported or translocated into the berry. As if the birds get it, or if it like drops onto the ground, this is removed from the vineyard in the end. So these are the ones that I would look into replacing at minimal amounts if you are not going to pick the fruit and you're looking to mothball the vineyard. But again, this demand will depend on how much water you put into this vineyard. You can reduce the yield by irrigation amounts. I'm not saying you absolutely have to irrigate these, but in California you do need some irrigation to make the plants behave the way you want them. When we compared three different irrigation treatments, 25, 50, 100% of ET, if you reduce the irrigation demand of the vineyard to 25% of the evaporation from that acre of land, you can reduce yield, therefore growth, by about 50%. So you already started out with a smaller canopy and you're only applying 1/4 of the demand. This will also reduce your mineral nutrient needs in this case significantly. Because you're also manipulating the source to sink ratio of these vines. Since there's not a whole lot of fruit demand from the plant, you do not need to pull a lot of mineral nutrients from the soil. You can export these to the other sinks, such as latent buds as well as the roots later on in the season during the second growth flush. So the question that I was asked about like 7 years ago was like, can I skip irrigation and fertilizer altogether? I wouldn't recommend it. I farm myself, so I couldn't sell all my fruit last year, so I'm not going to skip it again this year. However, you can significantly reduce it. So apply at most 25% of ET crop replacement if you're in an irrigated situation. This makes sure that you hit the minimum amount of water that's needed to keep these plants alive and exporting sugars to the perennial parts of the plant. Furthermore, it's required to keep a healthy leaf area, and you can also move nutrients into the rhizosphere. Mineral nutrition needs, I wouldn't recommend skipping it unless you're farming in a mineral soil, but this hardly occurs in California. We have gone by with at least 1/6 of the amount of producing a vineyard. The most important element we found out was to replace was potassium, because this keeps the water relations active, as well as in frost-prone areas, it gives you that extra protection. Mineral nutrition needs are needed for leaf area maintenance, and therefore you can maintain non-structural carbohydrates for the upcoming season's fruiting buds to feed these latent buds. Because leaf area is what's determining carbon fixation, not the amount of fruit you had. I had given this talk to Sonoma growers a couple of years back, and people were like, "Whoa, we didn't know that." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I didn't know that either." So when we left either 100% of the leaves or 100% of the fruit, 33% of the leaves or 33% of the fruit, if you remove the fruit, you're not getting any more benefit. What you're getting is, you're getting a lot of carbon starvation if you remove too many leaves, even with like too little fruit on it. So leaf area is what's determining the ongoings within the plant. Likewise, water relations are also determined by the leaf area of the plant. The 33% of the leaves compared to 100% of the leaves, whether you have all the fruit on there or 1/3 of the fruit, since they're carbon starved, the stomata is like open, and it's going to need a lot more water than if you had like no fruit on a 100% leaf area vine. So leaf area is quite important. And this reveals itself in the situation that how are these plants replenishing themselves to the upcoming season? Well, if you do not have enough leaf area, whether you have all the fruit on the vine, or if you remove that 66% of the fruit on the vine, you are going to be about like 12 weeks late to catch up in like root starches. Plant is not going to export enough sugars into the roots and to the perennial parts, whether you have a fruit or not on it, if it doesn't have the enough leaf area compared to a healthy leaf area on the vine. So then the $1 million question every year is, should I drop the unsold fruit? Keep in mind that harvest is completed 10 to 40 days post plateau of sugar accumulation. So this is completed 10 to 40 days after 21% total soluble solids are reached in the berry. So when the berries reach 21% total soluble sugars, there's no active translocation of sugars into the berry. So the essentially the clusters, for all practical purposes, cut off from the vine. At this point in time, the vine is more worried about like filling up its carbohydrate reserves. So carbohydrate reserves are also usually filled prior to harvest occurring. Again, as I mentioned, this is directly affected by the leaf area. Whether you remove the clusters, retain the clusters on the vine, this has no effect on starch accumulation in the vine, and also late harvest or early harvest has no effect. I'll make these slides available. I listed about 8 citations from the last 22 years. You can look at these, and all the scientific research also corroborates this. So leaving unsold clusters on the vine has no effect on the vine's ability to recuperate itself for the upcoming year. Okay, so that's the carbohydrate balance. So when we looked at this at the Oakville station, we dug these plants up. You can see that the peak anthocyanins was also reached at this 21 bricks, and the starch accumulation in these vines with the proper healthy leaf area was also optimized when the plants reached what we would call 12% alcohol level. And after that, they slowly decline. And at a bud break, mid-April, they're at their lowest amount, and then they keep up. But if you do not keep a healthy leaf area, look where the starches are at 21 bricks. Okay, and then they take an additional 12 weeks to catch up. So if you do not keep a healthy leaf area, whether you have clusters on it or not, it's irrelevant. So the phytosanitary concerns of leaving fruit on the vine is something we have been asked, and I think I presented this to Sonoma growers a couple of years back as well. Why we leave fruit on the vine? Well, we have overproduction. It happens, but because we get paid by the ton. I've been growing grapes for a long time. I have yet to be paid for quality. We all get paid by tons. But we have overproduction because we're importing more wines in the last decade. Sometimes cultivars fall out of favor. I have Syrah grapevines in my vineyard. I couldn't give them away this year. There's also the problem of contract cancellations. It happens, but we still get paid by the ton. But we're also importing more wines in the last decade, and there's also abiotic factors such as smoke effects due to a global change. So some fruit can be left on the vine even in like a normal year. So when you look at the phytosanitary concerns, all common pathogens exist in the vineyard at all times. Decaying berries is also one source of pathogens in the vineyard. We have these pathogens, post-harvest. You have the fallen petioles, fallen leaves. You have, the rachis after a mechanical harvest. That's full of pathogens. You have the tendrils that have wrapped themselves on the trellis. They have all the pathogens on them, and also irrigation lines. We don't think of them like something living, but they have lots of pathogens on on themselves as well. The fungi, when it comes to the fungi on decaying berries, they also have the same fungi as the growing berries. You have the botrytis, cladosporium, and aspergillus. These all occur on the decaying berries as well. These fungi may infect berries due to damage based on a sunburn, diffuse or unseen powdery mildew in a growing season as well. Botrytis cinerea in a vineyard is ubiquitous because it survives on dead tissue. It infects live tissue. It will grow on dead flower caps and stamens. It'll infect the young berry when the cap is shed. And sporulation is also observed from prunings, even if there's no fruit on the vine. And also, it can be also collected from the vineyard floor, even if the fruit has been picked. So this is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So whether you have a unpicked fruit or not, it doesn't matter. What affects inoculum carryover? Well, first of all, fungi has to be present. Your neighbors, if you have a vineyard that abandoned the vineyard, didn't prune the vineyard and let it, grow, it'll carry over from there. And of course, weather is a concern as well. When the date of bud break occurs and bloom occurs, this will also affect inoculum carryover. And vineyard floor management also affects this. So the question is, does leaving fruit on the vine have an adverse effect? Decaying fruit inevitably drops to the vineyard floor, or the birds come and pick them. Of course, decaying fruit is subject to bird herbivory, but we prune 90% of the wood anyways. Prior to a bud break, what happens? Prior to bud break, obligate parasites are released from fungal fruiting bodies, and this has no effect because there's nothing to infect at this point. What we usually recommend and what growers normally do is you eliminate the pruning wood and old fruiting wood at pruning. So 90% of us chip them and we incorporate them. We do a light disking in these vineyards. Or some people, if you're like, doing garden type of farming that I was doing in a certain Napa Valley appellation, you can haul them away. Of course, common sense prevails. Common ground cover management will also eliminate this inoculum source as well, 90% of the time. So phytosanitary concerns during mothballing. The question is, do I have to run a full program? When we ran these programs, the short answer is no. You don't have to run a full program. Do you still have to protect? Yes, canopy health is more important. You need to keep a healthy leaf area. Keep in mind, if you're not picking the fruit, you don't have to do these extra cover sprays, hoping that you'll protect the fruit. Canopy health is more important. Powdery mildew in season, this control is going to be more important. The recommended low-cost program, the one that worked for us the best, we used dry flowable sulfur at 5 pounds to the acre in 100 gallons water. We used a full rate program. We started with a delayed dormant sulfur spray, and following that, at least 4 cover sprays until 9 bricks kept the canopy healthy and strong. What we added to these mixes was an alpha-beta heartin protein. So this is what gave us the systemic acquired resistance, and it gave us the better water and end use as well, because it flips the genes within the grapevine plant to give you this extra oomph in this situation, because we did not necessarily care about harvesting the fruit in this case. So the other question we had to ask ourselves is like, is our sprayer ready for a different way of farming? Since we're making a different type of canopy, even though we were on these herringbone type of trellises, we made a tight box. with a mechanical pruner, how are we going to deal with our coverage in this case? So your gallons per acre is the ratio between your flow rate and your land rate. How many acres you're covering per minute. So your land rate is not just your tractor speed, it's the area covered per unit time. How many square feet you're covering per minute. So this is usually your speed in a foot per minute multiplied by the row width. So if you're, if you calibrate your tractor to 2.9 miles, and if your row width is, I don't know, 10 feet, you're covering 29 square feet per mile. Keep in mind that you spray volume that you're going to deliver in these intricate canopies for some reason that we planted to have something cool, I guess. Anyways, so the important thing is to know your flow rate in gallons per minute, and of course this is going to depend on how your straight spray tips are going to work in these different mothballed canopies that we're making in the end. If you look at the disc core setup in air blast sprayers, you're going to have the quarter spinner plate that will usually speed up the spray. So these need to be clean. So maintenance of the spray tips, if they're like chipped, dirty, plugged up, whatever, 9 out of 10 times we see these problems in the spinner plate. So make sure you open them up and check them. And as you install them, make sure the orientation is correct on the canopy that you're spraying, because you're making a different type of canopy in this case. So nozzle rate, as you're looking at this, it contributes greatly to it. It's directly proportional to your application rate. If you want a larger spray volume, because you're making a different canopy now, keep in mind, you can increase the flow rate by increasing the nozzle size. You can look at the TJET chart, choose a different disc, or you can make larger droplets in this case, or you can increase pressure to make smaller droplets. The ideal spray droplet size is going to be between 100 and 150 microns for the air blast type of sprayers that we're using. So I wouldn't go outside of these range, even with these different canopy types. So, of course, when you're like dealing with these, I would look at the label first, and then lastly, again, I'll look at the label again. Let's say you're doing an applause spray at 24 ounces to the acre to look at a mealybug control. If you're using a standard 400 gallon tank, you spraying 12 ounces to the acre in this case. You looked at your calibration, you're doing 118 gallons to the acre. So 400 gallon tank will spray 3.4 acres. And if you're doing 12 ounces to the acre, you're going to put 41 ounces of pesticide in the tank. But make sure you check this calibration. We have seen cases where they sprayed as a business as usual, and they did turn the grapevines white later on in the season, because they were still spraying at their normal rate as business as usual with shoot-thinned canopies. So the other question is, do you do ground management during mothballing? Of course, you have to do ground management during mothballing, because you have some concerns that you cannot get out of, such as direct competition from these weeds. Since you're applying less water, you're going to put an undue stress on the vines if you let the grass species get out of control, for example. And of course, in our case, we have to worry about frost protection. So you need to, take care of these weeds a little bit better if you're in a frost-prone area. But my number one concern is always harboring other pests, such as, Tika and species such as those that might, communicate or vector viruses. The question is like, well, will I save money if I don't, use chemicals? Tillage versus chemical control is the, $1 million question. Again, this is an economic consideration. If you can afford it, yeah, do tillage. But, I asked for the labor cards because I don't prune my vineyard yet rate. So I got quoted $22 an hour. I'm not going to put a person on a tractor at $25 an hour, so I know that for sure. But of course, the timing of application and the number of times you have to do an application and fuel and chemical costs all add up when you're doing tillage in these vineyards. So that's the number one concern in mothballing vineyards. But if this is if you're an organic grower, there's not much you can do to use some sort of tillage. When it comes to uh, management, row middles, we have found that clean row middles during the growing season is absolutely necessary to reduce the water competition from row middles. Under vine management, we looked at situations if we could skip out a residual herbicide, but we end up doing more burn down on herbicides later on in the season. So I would not skip a residual herbicide. For post-emergent herbicides, if you're using them, a good quality non-ionic surfactant or a translaminar surfactant is going to be needed depending on what kind of herbicide you're using. What we have seen is in areas with hard water, a water conditioner is needed. For example, at my vineyard, I'm having to add about 11 pounds of ammonium sulfate to 100 gallons of water. So these things, all will help you, extend your spray period in this case. Depending on what market you're going into, you either can choose glufosinate or glyphosate, but I don't know that many people are able to sell these days using just glyphosate in their operations. So for our programs, the ones that we tested, Chateau, Surfland, Gold, Prowl, they have all worked. We have used Efficax more recently as an adjuvant. It can keep the residual herbicides in the soil profile a lot longer. Again, as I mentioned, water conditioner, whether you use the labeled one, such as Cinder for hard water, or ammonium sulfate, if you're saving a couple of more bucks, these are absolutely essential. And then we always have added a good quality burn down herbicide to these as well. For post-emergence, we were able to get by with just one burn down spray. I have used glufosinate myself with a good quality surfactant such as Siltac. So one post-emergence spray is all I needed if I had done a good job with residual herbicide. Why am I recommending an adjuvant in a mothballed vineyard? Something such as Efficax can give you about 2 additional weeks of residual activity. This has pushed out our first burn down spray well into the June. I'll make the slides available. You can watch this video. I don't know if I have enough bandwidth to play this, but you can see the activity of this residual herbicide helper. This is with Prowl. You can keep this in the soil. This was in a highly permeable soil with sand. If you have the Efficax without Prowl and Prowl without Efficax, you can see how it disperses in this case. And it's quite interesting and how long you can keep this in the soil. So you have the Prowl and the Prowl with Efficax. It's quite an amazing thing. So it might add some dollars, but it'll cut down on your burn down much later on into the season. So when water's introduced in this thing, you can see that it's quite amazing and how it goes through this. So it's quite magic in my opinion, being in a agricultural research for the 24 years I was involved. So you can see that how this will stay in the soil profile compared to just like Prowl just dissipating through without itself. So it really does a good job, but you can watch it on your own. But anyways, so to finish up, so we were getting these questions, so we did. I mean, it was what you call like COVID time. So bored, Not much going on. So we looked at a return bloom comparison after one season of mothballing. So we mothballed the vineyard during COVID, and then we came back and looked at it in 2021. This vineyard was a 7x5 VSP trellis Cabernet Sauvignon on a weak rootstock. So our control was a non-pruned, abandoned vineyard. They were box pruned to 2 inches or hand pruned to 24 buds. The box prune vines, we either picked them, hand prune vines, we picked them as well compared to unpicked pruned vines. So when we came back in 2021, we counted the buds on the vine, 432 in non-pruned, box pruned had 134, hand pruned, crop picked 136, hand pruned ones, of course, had less. When we came back and I looked at the flowers on the vine, not all the buds in the non-pruned vines end up with live flowers. Box prune ones, of course, you had about 3 times as many flowers as actual buds. Likewise, whether you picked them or didn't pick them, didn't matter. Hand pruned vines, same thing. Whether you picked them or didn't pick them, didn't matter how many flowers you had on the vine, but you absolutely had to prune them. When we looked at the number of berries on the cluster, non-pruned vines, of course, did not put enough berries on the cluster because there wasn't enough, active leaf area to feed them because there's all this mutual shading that was limiting the extra leaf areas in the previous season acted as a drain. Conversely, prune vines, they all had somewhat a similar number of berries were clustered, but they were mathematically different. When we looked at the yield, box prune vines without any shoot thinning, crop removal, they had about 7.2 tons. Whether I picked them or didn't pick them, they had about 7 tons. Hand prune vines, they had about 5 tons on average. So take home messages: if you keep the leaf area healthy and prune them somewhat, they will come back the following year. So recommendations based on this 2-year trial. I would recommend doing a residual herbicide, something like a Chateau and a Efficax with a glufosinate. Then follow it up with a box prune to a 2-inch hedge. Delayed dormant sulfur at 5 pounds to the acre. We injected a 60-12 North Coast herbicide blend at 4 gallons to the acre. Very low amount of fertilizer. And we did dry flowable sulfur starting at 6 to 8 inches. This was done 4 times, and I keep the canopies healthy. And irrigation started at 25% of ET crops starting in June. Then we did a glyphosate burn down spray on the rows with a cinder and AMS. And it doesn't have to look pretty, but you just have to keep this thing alive. Some perspectives, mothballing a vineyard is of course an economic decision. If you're thinking about changing cultivars, this gives you another opportunity to chop this down and insert 2 pencil grafts in there to change the top of the vine. And I think it's a smart decision. Vineyard removal is irreversible, and it costs a ton of money. If I remove my vineyard, I probably won't plant it back, because the costs are through the roof now to put in a vineyard. I don't know if you guys have applied to mask funds. It will keep these farms afloat because the limit this year was $900,000 from USDA because it's based on the expected yields. So I think it was a good program, and USDA, I'm glad they were made it available. But if you're mothballing a vineyard, it's a smart decision to do it if you do not have a contract this year. So that's all I have, Jason, and I can answer some questions.
Okay, great. We'll try to get to a couple questions here real quick before we turn over to Andy. So we have 4 questions. First one came in, I understand no fertigation, which I don't think was your recommendation, but what about mulching or weed suppression and some benefit building organic material in the soil?
Well, I mean, mulching and organic matter addition to the soil is adding, some sort of fertilizer into the thing. I mean, when we looked at biochar or compost addition to get the same amount we were getting from 4 gallons to the acre 6312 fertilizer was equivalent to like 3.5 tons of compost. So I mean, it's an economic decision in the end. We're doing this, to keep the farm afloat. So if it pencils out for you, I mean, do it. We were operating under limited funds at a university, so that was our approach, trying to do the bare minimum because spreading mulch has a cost because you need to bring in equipment, and I'm too old these days to spread stuff by hand.
That makes sense. Yeah, cost is a factor there. So we have two people asking about sulfur dust as an option.
Sulfur dust is an option. Sulfur dust is an option. But we found dry flowable sulfur to be a better protectant than sulfur dust because uh, the flowable sulfurs have a better ability to stick to the leaves because they've been fined so much that there's attraction when mixed with water to make the suspension to stick to the leaves. So of course, sulfur dust is an option, and you can drive faster with the sulfur duster. You can go 5 miles an hour as opposed to 3, but I'm not that brave.
We have somebody asking about why does competition with weeds matter if you're going to irrigate sub 50% ET? We know that we can push 25%, so doesn't that provide some wiggle room for competition?
Uh, my concern is in our climate in North Coast, it's like a petri dish, right? Every invasive species is present, and we have a lot of dairies, pastures around. My idea of controlling the weeds on the berm is to limit transference of leaf hoppers onto the vines. So, of course, you don't want the direct competition from the weeds in addition to the, lower amount of water we're applying. So the idea is to, give them as much as you can without like limiting this limited leaf area that we created. One thing I forgot to mention, when we did the box pruning, we measured the leaf area on these things compared to a hand prune. In all cases, hand pruned vines, even just with 24 buds, had about 17% more leaf area than the box pruned vines.
Con, I'm gonna make sure we have enough time for Andy and Misty here.
Sure,
So there
sure.
are four more questions in there. If you don't mind typing answers while we're in the next session, or if you want to stay on and we can loop
Sure,
back
I
on if
can
we have a little more
type them
time
on.
with you.
Let me plug in my computer.
Okay, great. So hey, I'm going to so thanks, Con. That's super important. I am going to type a question in there too about the economics. And you and I had talked a little bit before the program started, so just kind of what you found out there. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Misty Eland and Andy Casares. So Misty from the Department of Weights and Measures, Andy also with the County of Sonoma. Andy's the Land Stewardship Division Manager for the Sonoma County Department of Agriculture, where he oversees resource management, environmental permitting, and land conservation programs, including VESCO compliance. And I think Misty, you were going to talk first. So Misty with the Department of Weights and Measures, and of course, our ex officio officer on the board of directors. So turning the meeting over to you guys. Take it away.
Thank you, Jason. I'm just on here for a minute or two with a friendly commissioner reminder that you can reduce your pest management efforts, but you can't completely stop or abandon a vineyard. If that vineyard is harboring a pest, a disease, a weed that is detrimental to your neighbor, it becomes classified as a public nuisance. And when that happens, if you're concerned that there's a neighbor that is causing problems in your vineyard, you can reach out to our office. It's up to it's the commissioner's discretion if, pest has reached that threshold or not. And so far, these matters have always been settled with a phone call, a visit. Yes, you need to handle this, and then the property owner has handled it. But if that doesn't happen, and it is on the owner of the property to manage a vineyard, it can escalate. The commissioner does have the authority to abate that pest for you if you're refusing to do it. And that abatement comes at no cost to the county. So it turns into a big issue because that cost becomes a lien on the property or an order to destroy. So please don't just stop doing anything. Find some way to manage it or make a decision to pull.
Thank you, Misty. All right, flip it
All
over
right,
to
hello, everybody.
Andy.
None of the reverb. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Andy Casares. I manage the Land Stewardship Division at the Sonoma County Ag Department. And the main program that we wrestle with every day is the Vineyard Erosion and Sediment Control Ordinance, lovingly known as VESCO, which is the permitting program for vineyards and orchards in the county. And we also do the permitting for ag grading and drainage. And so this is obviously a hot topic right now with the markets being what they are. We've been receiving a lot of phone calls with questions. And what I want to talk about is fallowing a property, like how the county sees that. So nothing that the previous speaker, Kaan, was talking about would necessarily require additional permitting from us. Where we require permitting is for the ground disturbance. You don't need a permit to pull vines out, but you do need a permit to put vines back in. So when people call with questions, we always recommend, unless they're going to pull vines and just walk away from the property completely, we always recommend that they get a replant permit before they pull their vines out, because there's a lot of reasons for this. If you're planning on putting vines back in, there's much lower permitting thresholds for a replant in the eyes of the county than a new development. So like, for example, if you've got a replant project, meaning the vines are still in the ground, when you come in and get your permit, we do not have a biological study requirement for that. Whereas if it's the vines are gone, like say, in fact, you pull the vines out now and come back in a few years, you want to put vines back in, you've got to hire a professional biologist to go out there and do an assessment of the property, looking for wetlands or spring features, setbacks from streams, and things like that. Whereas if it's a replant, you don't have to do that unless you're in a critical habitat for a federally listed species like the California tiger salamander, for example. But for the majority of the properties in the county, you will not have that requirement if it's seen as a replant. And as part of that, you can maintain your existing footprint too. Like the Russian River has a 100-foot setback from the top of bank requirement for agriculture. And many of the blue line streams in the county have a 50-foot setback requirement, but you can be grandfathered into a 25-foot setback, and many of the vineyards in the county have that 25-foot setback. But again, if you pull the vines out and come and try to get a permit later, you're going to lose that footprint. You're going to be pushed back to that 50 or 100-foot mark. And there's also a lower bar for the level 2 requirements if it's a new development. So the level 1 is the easy one where the farmer can just put together all the paperwork for it. Whereas if it's a level 2, you have to hire a licensed civil engineer to develop an erosion control plan for that project. So if it's a replant, for most soil types in the county, you can go to a 30% slope and still have it considered a level 1. Whereas if it's a new development, that goes down to 15%. So again, it's much easier to get a replant permit than a new development permit. And the other thing that helps us out is all VESCO permits are good for 5 years. They're good for 5 years from the time of issuance. But then as of the beginning of 2021, the Board of Supervisors approved a very simple extension process. So now we can extend a permit from a 5-year permit to a 10-year permit. So you can get a one-time additional 5-year extension to your permit. So when you come in here and get a replant permit, you can easily think about it as a 10-year permit. There's a form on our website that's a writable PDF. It's very simple. You fill that thing out and get it to us, and that's a request for the extension. And as long as you get it before the initial permit expires, you're good to go. So that's a really important thing. So mark your calendars. If you go beyond, we get some phone calls from people that the permit expired like last October. Now they're looking to extend it, and it's too late. So as long as you get it to us before that expiration date, then you can get another 5 years on that permit. And that's also another cool thing about this process is even if there's a change to the requirements, to the regulations at the county level, the state level, if you're already holding a permit, those changes and regs will not apply to you. You're kind of like in the pipeline. And so you're shielded from any change. So within that 10 years, think about that, even if there's some change in the county, you'll still be protected and your initial plans will still be valid through even if there's a change in the local regs. And what else here? Oh, no, it's relatively cheap too. So like the initial permit can be kind of expensive and time consuming. The extension, basically it costs the amount it takes us to process it. So that's usually just like $300 or $400. So pretty easy there. And so now, so now you've got a permit. You pull your vines out. What happens now? As far as the ag department is concerned, you can do kind of whatever you want out there. You can lease it to hay growers. A lot of people are talking about doing that, hay or silage or grow veggies out there. You could create a BMX track out there, host a concert series, like really whatever you want to do. Like the ag department does not care, as long as by November 15th every year, you've got an established cover crop out there. So that's just like the normal Vesco reg. So if you go out there, any disturbed soil, we want to have it buttoned up by that November 15th date, which is the typical winterization date for replant. So as long as we have that going every single year, whatever you're doing out there, you'll be good with the ag department. One thing that I want to leave you folks with, and this is kind of the last thing, and it's a big one, is that what we don't want to see is the vineyard managers, property owners fallow their ground and then walk away and then completely leave it alone for like 10 years and assuming everything's fine. We're still gonna want to see some sort of management out there, right? Like a lot of these properties, we're seeing these projects come in for like 150 acres on these big old vineyards that they're going to pull the vines and let them go fallow for however long. And these things have these big elaborate drainage systems in them, so those types of things need to be maintained. There's sediment bases that need to be cleaned out. There's the V ditches that capture the water coming down the hill, then routing them to the pipe inlets that need to be maintained. There's the sediment collars around the pipe inlets that need to be cleaned out, after storms and then hopefully before the big storms. We need, there's a bunch of pipe outfalls that drain close to or in the creeks that need to be managed, make sure that there's not a big scour hole developing. So there's going to need to be some sort of management on these properties, even if it's left fallow for this whole time. And just keep in mind that the owners are ultimately responsible for any sort of discharges. So if you've got a big gully that's developed, you got a pipe network that plugs, and you got a big gully or a landslide that happens, you guys are going to have to deal with it. The owners are going to have to deal with it. And there's a discharge into the creek. You're going to have the water board on you guys and fishing game and us. So even though you might leave the property alone and trying to save money, which is, we're all for, there still has to be some sort of maintenance that occurs out there in order to make sure that everything's intact throughout the time period of this fallow. And that's it. That's what I got.
Thank you, Andy. I had just one quick point of clarification too. So you mentioned, obviously it's about land disturbance that you guys are looking at and having that permit in place before the soil's moved. So I saw this in a few cases last year. Some growers I don't think they had their Vesco permit in hand, but also didn't want to bear the expense of farming those vines. So they went out and chainsawed the vines, the trunks of the vines, and just left the vineyard there until they could secure the Vesco permit. kind of eliminated some of their planting costs. What's your view of that? That's then obviously acceptable to a certain extent. Or
That's fine. Yeah, we've had some people that are in the more like time-consuming, lengthy level 2 process, and they're like in a real rush to get the vines out for whatever reason. So we will let folks go out there and chop them, like you're saying, so they don't have to deal with them anymore until they get their permits, and then they can go out there and deep rip and get all the root masses and everything out. So that is definitely viable. If you want to just go ahead and chop them down, you can do that, before you get a permit.
there's 2 questions in the inbox, and I have one more too. So in the context of pluck and plant, and forgive my ignorance on this, as far as permitting goes, I mean, I think my understanding is pluck and plant is just kind of a go ahead process. So in that case, could people go pluck vines and then just leave the trellis there? What's the status on the Vesco?
There's like they're calling it a registration. So you actually do, there's again a super quick, easy permitting. It's not a permit. It's not a permit. It's a registration, they call it. The lawyers see a big difference between those two things. So there is a very small process that we come in and that we will do some paperwork on that, because there are some there's a couple of requirements for a vineyard to be able to qualify for that. Like, it's had to have gone through the Vesco process at some point in the past. So like the footprint has already been like vetted. There's a couple things that we need to check in order for a vineyard to be able to qualify for a plug and plan versus a normal Vesco permit.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then there's one question here. Andy commenting regarding November date should be covered by cover crop. Is this typical of other commercial vineyard counties in Northern California?
Yes, exactly that. Just a cover crop, or even if it's like a straw mulch and like seed, that's fine as well, as long as whatever disturbed ground is covered by that date.
Outstanding. Thank you, Andy, for weighing in on that. And
Sure.
I've got a question here from Misty.
Yes.
Andy, if someone obtains a replant permit and then a few years from now sells the property, does the permit transfer to the new owner?
Yes, Misty, it does.
Yeah. What we do ask is that somebody in that process, whether it's the seller or the owner, usually it's the seller, it lets us know that they sold the property to somebody else, because the owner is ultimately responsible for the work or any sort of whatever work or mess is happening at the property. The owner is ultimately responsible. So usually there's somebody along the string that really wants to let us know that it's not us anymore, it's them. But it will stay with the property. And a lot of folks will actually go through the permitting process and acquire those permits, and then they sell the property with that. They can actually bump up the value of the property by letting them know that everything's all like ready to go for whatever that project is.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. So before we wrap up, Kaan, if you're still on there, I did have one question that we had briefly touched on right before we went live, and that was kind of the economics. If you looked at the economics in your trial over there, if you wouldn't mind just kind of reviewing that.
We looked at the economics of the trial because, I mean, you know how Napa County is. You somewhat operate in a vacuum. So our costs per acre were roughly around like $7,600 to $7,700 an acre in a normal year. By switching to this method, we got down to about $2,200 an acre. But of course, no one has these costs anywhere else. But the relationship should still hold through, so you can reduce your cost by about 75% in this case.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure we touched on that before we logged out. So, Kaan, again, I want to thank you for your participation. We owe you a couple bottles of Sonoma County wine and a treat to lunch. And I know Andy and Misty, as county employees, can't accept those gifts. So
I'll take
I just want to
theirs.
thank them. Yeah, very good. All right. We'll transfer that over. So thank you, Andy and Misty. And thank you, everybody, for logging on. We'll see you at Grape Day. Take care, Kaan. Safe travels.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks, Jason.